Hello. Well, this week we'll be looking at the rest of Chapter 9, the scholarship and the Nachleben and the alternate, the myth from a different culture. And we'll be looking at the beginning of Chapter 10 about heroes. And the hero stuff is really sort of why I like myth. The heroic stuff, the stuff that's in tragedy, where we have tragic heroes, that's really sort of what keeps me going in Greek and Latin literature. So, first of all, the second part of chapter 2 deals with initiations and inversions. It looks at, again, at ritual and at the liminal stage of ritual. There's an examination by a man named Csapo of gender bending and this challenge to gender identity in the Bacchic rites. So one of the things about the rites of Bacchus as opposed to some other rituals, some rituals are rituals of transformation. So those rituals, like for instance a wedding, right? You go in one way, you come out changed. And that's a permanent change. I mean, marriages don't always last, but I mean, it's not like over quickly. Bacchic rites tend to be more temporary things, so they may be more radical in challenging the norm and the structure of society, but it's sort of like you get that out of your system and then you go back to living your normal life. So that gets addressed by Csapo. The other culture that we look at this time is we look at a Roman author. The Roman author's name is Catullus, and there's a consideration of Cybele, who is an Eastern goddess. So she's a goddess associated with Syria, with basically modern day, she is associated with Syria, but she's also associated with like modern day Turkey. This is where her cult was. So it was in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. The Romans did build a temple to Cybele in Rome, and one of the rules was that no Roman citizen could be a priest of Cybele, because the priests of Cybele all had to be castrated, and there was a Roman sort of rule against castration. The poem tells the story of Attis, and the opening of the poem I think is really amazing. So in the opening, Attis arrives in the east. He immediately starts to take part in the ritual. He castrates himself, and all of that happens like in the first, 20 lines or something. It's very quick. And then he falls asleep. He passes out from the sort of alcohol and exertion and everything else. And then he wakes up, and in Catullus's version, he regrets the fact that he did what he did. And Catullus is a Roman author. He's a fairly liberal Roman author, but the Romans had an aversion to castration. They had a sort of official aversion to homosexuality or any sort of gender, non-traditional gender roles. There were Romans who were gay, but it was less positively looked on than it was by the Greeks. So consequently, Catullus really sort of comes down hard on the idea of Attis regretting. The Nachleben section, the end of chapter 9, looks at Dionysus in the 1960s. So there's a consideration of a play called Dionysus in 69, which was a play played in off-Broadway, and it was filmed. If you go to YouTube, you can actually see the filmed version of one of these performances. What this particular play did is it broke down the wall between the audience and the theater, and the audience and the players on the stage. So in other words, there was no stage as such. You had the actors mixing in with the people. The people were sort of sitting on like bleachers on the side, but the cast members could go out into the audience, or the audience could actually come onto the central area, which was like the stage area, and participate. There's a play by Wole Soyinka, an African playwright and essayist who won the Nobel Prize, some years ago, called the Bacchae, a communion rite. It's a version of Euripides' Bacchae. It's not an exact translation. He takes into account like African ritual and so forth. But he calls it a communion rite, which in a sense it is, because the way the Bacchic celebration worked was that you would drink the wine, and so you were taking in the body of Dionysus, right? So that's part of the ritual. So it is sort of a communion rite. And then the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was a play and then made into a movie, and some of you may have gone to some of these events where you go there and you throw toilet paper and you do other wild stuff because you're participating in the movie. I mean, the movie doesn't know you're participating in it, but everyone who goes, it's sort of an event. Most of the people who go to these events have seen the movie several times. They know the lines, and so they'll shout out, bits and pieces, or act out bits and pieces. Some people will go to the front and actually act out some of the character stuff that's on the screen behind them. And these, the Dionysus in 69, since that is available on YouTube, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is easily available, you could also write, an extra credit paper on those if you didn't want to write one on the Pygmalion story. If you're interested in doing extra credit papers. So chapter 10 introduces us to heroes. And one of the things about Greek heroes is Greek heroes are not necessarily good people. That's a key thing. They're not necessarily good people, or they don't necessarily do good things. So for us, I think, tend to think of heroes the way Romans would think of heroes. And these Roman heroes, Roman-style heroes, or the heroes that we have, they generally do something great for the community, right? That's the deal. I mean, for a Roman hero, Roman heroes do things that advances the cause of Rome. If they're not advancing the cause of Rome, then they are not Roman heroes. So I've got a dog who's eating things that she shouldn't be eating. So, and that's true for us, right? So, like, when we think of an American hero, we think of a soldier who's done something great to help win, like, a battle in World War II or something, or has, like a fireman who's saved someone's life, right? And those people are heroic. There's no, you won't get an argument from me on that. But for the Greeks, heroes were not necessarily good, or they didn't necessarily do good things. The key thing about a hero for the ancient Greeks was that they did something that was exceptional, something that was beyond what normal people could do. So to some extent, like, Olympic victors were heroes, right? Because they did something that no one else could do, especially someone who was like a record holder. They would be something who was above and beyond the norm. But the figure that I have on this, Cleomedes was an Olympic athlete. He was a pancratiast, I think. So he participated in what was called the pancration, which means all battle. And this was basically a wrestling boxing combination. And there were certain rules, certain things you couldn't do, but otherwise it was pretty much no holds barred. So you could pretty much do a lot of things. You could kick, you could do other things. What you couldn't do is you couldn't gouge the eyes, and there were a couple of other things you couldn't do. Cleomedes participated in this event. He did break the rules, and he killed his opponent. And so he was disqualified, so he basically went home in shame. On his way home, he was going through a town. In the town, there was a school. In the school, there were kids, and the kids were singing songs about one thing or another. This really angered Cleomenes. Cleomenes went into the school area, the area where the kids were, and he knocked out the support pillars, and the ceiling collapsed, and the kids were crushed. So he basically killed, a schoolroom of kids. He then took it on the lam, and he went into the temple of Apollo in the town and hid out there. Now, the rules were you could not go into the temple to drag someone out. So there was this idea of sanctuary. If someone made it to a temple, they could stay there, and you could not actually use force to get them out. But what you could do is you could make sure that no food got into the temple, and so therefore the person eventually would come out because they were starving. So that's what the townspeople do. They wait for quite some time. They don't get any sign that Cleomenes is still in the temple. They go to investigate, and Cleomenes is not there. Now, they had the place, covered from all sides, so he didn't get out, but he was gone. And so they go to the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, and they ask about this, and the Oracle at Delphi says, you must build a shrine to Cleomenes. In other words, he's a hero. His chief thing is that he basically killed a bunch of kids, right? This would be like saying, well, you need to build a shrine to Timothy McVeigh, would be maybe the equivalent for us. So for us, that's sort of an alien concept. But the thing is, a hero is someone of great power. They can use that power for good, or they can use that power for ill, right? But what they do is exceptional. So that's the key thing to keep in mind for heroes. Most heroes had shrines to them. Sometimes the shrines were very close to where they were buried, sometimes not. But in any case, the point of the shrine was that you would show reverence to the hero, and then the hero would bless the community. Because the idea was that the hero was someone of exceptional ability, and that ability somehow continued after death. And if you didn't honor them, what would happen is they would then use their great power or influence with the gods to bring misfortune on the community. Right, so that's sort of the deal, is that you're basically not quite paying them off, but you're basically treating them with great respect, as you would a god, so that they do not actually use their power for ill against the community. And that's a fairly common thing. Now, the Greek lit in section 10.1 is there's some selections from Homer's Iliad. Now, Homer's Iliad is a poem about the Trojan War. The title, Iliad, just means the poem about Troy. That's what the title means. It does not tell the whole story of the Trojan War. Trojan War was a 10-year war between the Greeks and the Trojans. The given reason for the Trojan War was that Paris, a Trojan prince, had come to Sparta, where he seduced Helen, the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and that he took Helen back with him to Troy, where they basically lived as a married couple. And negotiations to get her back failed, and so then there was the war. All right, so that's sort of the setup for the war. Now, historically, was there a Trojan War? Probably. There is a city that could be considered Troy, found where Troy's supposed to be. It was found by a guy named Heinrich Schliemann, and it's been excavated by several scholars since Schliemann in the 19th century. None of the cities that are excavated exactly match what we get in descriptions of Troy in the Iliad, but it's possible that what we have here is a composite of different versions of the city combined into one. So it's a sort of a fictionalized account, but there seems to have been an actual Trojan War. Achilles is the hero of the Iliad. He is a Greek hero, and he is called more than once the greatest of the Achaeans. The Achaeans is one of the terms for the Greeks. The Argives is another term for the Greeks, and the Danaans is the third term. They're never called Greeks by Homer. So Homer doesn't use the word Graiki. That word actually is a Roman word for the Greeks. So the Achaeans technically mean the people from Achaea, which is in the northern part of Greece. The Argives are from the southern part of Greece. But those terms are used of the Greeks just interchangeably, whether they're from that area or not. So the deal is in the poem that the poem only deals with about 2 months of the last year of the Trojan War, and most of it just covers like about 4 days in that 2-month period. Agamemnon insults Achilles by taking the slave girl that was given to Achilles after the last siege they did against one of the neighboring towns. Right, so what they would do is they'd go out on these raids to neighboring towns to basically get loot and supplies. And so when they did that, Achilles got a particular slave woman to be his slave woman and companion, and Agamemnon, who did something foolish and that caused him to lose his prize, then demanded that Achilles give Agamemnon, because he was the leader of the expedition, his prize, so that he, Agamemnon, would not be without one. Achilles takes this as a great insult, and he basically withdraws from the battle. The Greeks start losing to the Trojans, not right away, but eventually they start losing to the Trojans, because Zeus is sort of helping the Trojans to increase the fame of Achilles. How is that going to work? Well, Achilles is going to he'll be out for a couple of months. Things will get progressively worse, and while they get progressively worse, the people were begging for Achilles to come back. When he finally does come back, he will be seen as a great hero and savior, right? So that's the idea, and that is sort of how the course plays out. Achilles does not realize the full effect of this, because the thing that finally compels him to go back to fight is that a friend of his goes into battle in Achilles' place and gets killed by Hector. And that is the thing that finally... So Achilles says, I've been insulted. I don't have to take this. I refuse to fight for a man who would insult me. All of that is actually good, and he is correct. From the Greek perspective, he is 100% correct in taking that position. Agamemnon should not have insulted him. He did. It was a profound and public insult, and Achilles is under no obligation to help a man who insulted him. So that part, he's okay. But when he continues to refuse to fight as things start to get worse for the Greeks, then things sort of change. And finally, this forces the friend Patroclus to go into battle. He gets killed by Hector. And then Achilles sort of realizes that his refusal to fight resulted in his friend's death, and that in a sense he's partly responsible for Patroclus' death. So he's sort of a tragic figure. The poem does not end with Achilles' death. It ends with Hector's death and the funeral of Hector. That's the last thing in the book. So it doesn't tell the whole story of the Trojan War. It is clear in the poem that Troy is going to fall, and it's going to fall soon. Achilles, as I said, does not die in the poem. He will be dead before Troy is taken. So we're not getting the whole story. But I'm very fond of the Iliad. I think the Iliad is a great war poem, and it's a great poem about responsibility and what it means to be a great person. In Achilles' case, he's a great warrior. He's the best of the warriors the Greeks have. But his sense of pride, which is part of what the hero is. The hero is a very proud person, and if their pride is insulted, they will take action. It's often bad for the community, and he does that. And in a sense, he's justified in doing that up to a point. But in the end, the thing that he valued most, his friend, dies because of what he did. So it's heroes are seen by the Greeks as a blessing potentially, but also as a curse potentially. Because a hero like Cleomedes can do something bad, or Achilles can not take action, which results in bad things, and still be considered a hero.